A very pregnant woman got on a bus and noticed a young man across from her smiling. She felt uncomfortable and moved to another seat. A moment later, she noticed he was still smiling. Actually, now he was grinning, so she moved again. When she moved the fourth time and he burst out laughing, she was so upset that she reported him and he ended up in court. The judge asked the young man to explain himself. He said, "Your Honor, when she first got on the bus, she sat under a sign that said, 'The Devilment Twins are coming,' so I smiled. Then she moved and sat under a sign that read, 'Logan's liniment reduces swelling,' so I had to smile again. After that, she moved under a deodorant advertisement that said, 'William's big stick did the trick,' and I was really trying not to laugh. But when she moved one more time and sat under a sign that read, 'Goodyear rubber could have prevented this situation,' I just couldn't help it." Case dismissed. Not having a lady in his life, a young male hawk was desperate for a little love action. From his perch in the woods, he spotted a dove. So he swooped down, carried the dove into the bushes, and soon there was plenty of noise, flapping wings, and sounds of lovemaking. After a minute or so, the dove staggers out, feathers ruffled, and said, "I'm a dove and I've been loved." But the hawk wasn't satisfied, so next he found a lark. Once again, into the bushes they went, more flapping wings and amorous noises. Out came the lark, smiling and saying, "I'm a lark and I've felt the spark." Still, that wasn't enough. Finally, the hawk spotted a duck and swooped down. By now, all the animals in the woods were watching, knowing exactly where this was headed. The bushes shook harder than ever, crashing, thrashing, and sending feathers flying everywhere. Moments later, the hawk staggered out, missing feathers, sporting a black eye, and clearly regretting his last choice. From inside the bushes, the duck called out, "I'm a drake, and you made a mistake." A husband and wife, Edna and Harold, in their 90s, were sitting watching TV. Harold turned to Edna and said, "I'm going to the kitchen to get a sandwich. Do you want anything?" Edna replied, "Yes, actually. Fetch me a bag of chips." Harold replies, "Write that down. I'm not going to remember all that." She looked at him and said, "I don't need to write it down. Surely, Harold, you can remember a bag of chips." He laughed. "Okay, I've got it. A sandwich and some chips. Easy." About 20 minutes later, he comes back with a plate of eggs and bacon and puts it in front of her. Edna stares at it and says, "For Christ's sake, Harold, you forgot the toast." Dealing with teenagers. Every teenager thinks they found the perfect argument until Dad has the final word. A teenage boy had just gotten his learner's permit and asked his dad if they could sit down and talk about him using the family car. His father said, "I'll tell you what, we'll make a deal. Bring your grades up from a C to a B average, spend some time reading your Bible, and get your hair cut. Then we'll talk about the car." The boy thought about it and agreed. About 6 weeks later, they sat down again to talk. His father said, "Son, I have to tell you, I'm really proud of you. Your grades have improved, and I've noticed you've been reading your Bible a lot more." Then he paused and said, "But I'm still disappointed you haven't cut your hair." The boy thought for a moment and then said, "Well, Dad, while I was reading the Bible, I noticed something. Samson had long hair, John the Baptist had long hair, Moses had long hair, and a lot of people think Jesus had long hair too." His dad smiled, nodded, and said, "That may be true, son, but did you also notice they walked everywhere they went?" A man came home after a long day, sat down in his favorite chair and said, "Quick, can I have a Guinness before it starts?" She brought him one, though she looked a bit puzzled. A little later, he said, "Can I have another before it starts?" She brought the second one, this time not looking very happy about it. A few minutes later, he said, "Better bring me one more Guinness, it's about to start any second." That was the last straw. She put her hands on her hips and said, "Are you planning to sit there all night drinking while I wait on you? You're unbelievable. You come home, sit down, and expect me to run around after you like I have nothing better to do?" The man took a deep breath and said, "It started." A priest and a nun are traveling back from the seminary when their car breaks down. The local garage won't open until morning, so they find a small B&B for the night. Unfortunately, there's only one room left. The priest says, "Sister, I'm sure the Lord would understand if we share the room. I'll sleep on the sofa and you can take the bed." "That sounds perfectly fine," the nun replies. They say their prayers and settle in for the night. The priest switches on the TV and the nun takes out her needlework. About 10 minutes later, the nun calls out, "Father, I'm very cold." The priest sighs. "All right, sister, I'll get you a blanket from the closet." Another 10 minutes pass and then the nun speaks. "Father, I'm still terribly cold." "Don't worry," he says, "I'll get you another blanket." A few more minutes go by and then the nun speaks again, this time softly. "Father, I'm still terribly cold. I don't think the Lord would mind if just for one night we acted as husband and wife." There's a pause, and then the priest says, "All right, get your own blanket, woman. I'm trying to watch the game." A new man is hired on a building site. Every day, he arrives in a top-spec Mercedes. The other builders are wondering how he can afford it and start hassling the foreman, thinking he must be getting better pay. After a few days of this, the foreman decides to ask him what the story is. Foreman: "How can you afford that car?" New man: "I'm a gambler. I'd gamble on 2 flies going up a wall if I thought I'd make money." Foreman: "But how can you make money? Surely you must lose every now and then." New man: "Nope. I always make money. I'll take a bet with you right now that in 2 weeks you'll have constipation and white dots on your ass. $200. What do you say?" So the foreman takes the bet, and he's careful. He uses the fancy toilet roll, has an extra scrub in the shower, and makes sure he's not sitting on any dodgy surfaces. After the fortnight is up, he goes to collect his money. New man: "I have to check, don't I? Can't just take your word for it." The foreman isn't pleased, but he wants the $200, so he allows an inspection. The new guy uses a trowel to part the ass cheeks as he takes a good look. After a careful inspection, he agrees there is no constipation or white dots, so he pays up the $200, as agreed. The foreman asked, "How do you make money taking a stupid bet like that? How the heck does that work?" New man: "I didn't tell you this, but I took a bet with every man on the site that today you'd let me spread your ass cheeks with my trowel in front of the whole site." Several days after his wife vanished after falling overboard in a yachting accident, Mr. Smith opened his door to find 2 serious-looking state troopers. "Mr. Smith, we have news regarding your missing wife," one trooper began. "Tell me, did you find her? Is she alive?" he asked anxiously. The troopers exchanged glances. One said, "We have some bad news, some good news, and some fantastic news. Which would you like first?" Bracing himself, Smith replied, "Tell me the bad news." The trooper sighed. "I'm sorry, sir, but we recovered your wife's dead body in the bay this morning." "Oh, no," the husband gasped, nearly passing out and grabbing the trooper's arm to steady himself. "And what possibly would be the good news?" The grooming trooper grinned. "When we pulled her up, we found 12 giant, juicy king crabs hanging on her." The husband is confused. Then what's the fantastic news?" The second trooper charked, "We're pulling her up again tomorrow morning." A power-hungry politician, full of smiles, handshakes, and a sense of his own importance, rolled into a tiny, dirt-poor town in a convoy of black SUVs. The election was only days away, and his advisor said the couple of hundred votes from this tiny, forgotten little town could decide the result. He gathered the town inhabitants together in the square and shouted, "My friends, I can see you've suffered long enough with poor facilities and services. Today, I'm here to help you put that right, and I grant you 2 wishes, anything you want. Don't worry about the cost. I'll make it happen." The town spokesman stepped forward and said, "Well, sir, our first wish is for a proper hospital. We townsfolk are often taken ill, and the nearest hospital is at Lee's Drive." Then he said, his phone started to ring. "One moment, sir, must be the president." He pulled out his fancy iPhone, held it to his ear, and started theatrically pacing around importantly. "Hello, get me the state governor. Yes, I'm in the town now. Cancel that city stadium project. I want a 5-story hospital built here within a month. Yes, 1 month. The best doctors, the best equipment, spare no expense." He ended the call theatrically, wiped his brow, and smiled proudly at the onlooking crowd. "There you go, hospital sorted. Now tell me, what's your second wish?" The townsfolk looked at each other, and then the town representative spoke again. "Well, sir, our second wish is a simple one. We'd like a mobile phone tower." The politician frowned. "Why's that?" The spokesman replied, "Because there hasn't been any signal here for the last 20 years. For his birthday, David got a parrot. But this wasn't your average, sweet-talking bird. Oh no, this parrot was fully grown, had a nasty attitude, and had a mouth worse than a sailor on bad coffee. Every other word was either rude, offensive, or downright unrepeatable. David tried everything to fix this feathered menace. He spoke kindly to it, played soft music, even tried classical radio. Nothing worked. The more polite David was, the more disrespectful the parrot became. He yelled, it yelled louder. He threatened it, it cursed him out. It was like living with a feathery little gangster. One day, at his wit's end, David lost it. In a moment of pure desperation, he gently shoved the parrot into the freezer for just a few seconds, just to cool him off, literally and figuratively. The bird went wild, squawking, scratching, and kicking the door. Then suddenly, silence. Panicked, David flung open the freezer door. The parrot calmly stepped out, eyes wide, feathers slightly frosty, and said in the most polite tone ever, "Sir, I deeply apologize for my past behavior. I have seen the error of my ways, and I will make every effort to be a modeled bird from now on. Please forgive me." David stood there stunned, trying to process the sudden transformation. Before he could say a word, the parrot leaned in and whispered, "May I ask, what exactly did the poor chicken do?" An Irish dad calls his son in New York the day before Easter Saturday and says, "I hate to ruin your day, but I have to tell you that your mother and I are separating." "Dad, what are you talking about?" the son shouts. "We can't stand the sight of each other any longer," the father says. "We're sick of each other, and I'm sick of talking about it, so you call your sister in Washington and tell her." The son calls his sister in Washington, and she explodes on hearing the news. "What the hell? No, they are not separating. I'll handle this." She immediately calls Ireland and yells at her father, "You are not doing anything until I get there. I'm calling my brother and we'll both be there tomorrow. Do you hear me? Don't do a thing." She hangs up and the old man turns to his wife and smiles. "Sort it. They're coming for Easter and they're paying for their own flights." Two women friends went out for a girls' night. They were both devoted, faithful wives, but they enjoyed themselves a little too much and ended up walking home quite tipsy. On the way, they both suddenly needed to use the bathroom. With no restrooms around, they slipped into a quiet cemetery. One of the women finished and realized she had nothing to wipe with, so she reluctantly used her underwear. Her friend, however, was wearing an expensive pair and didn't want to ruin them. She spotted a wreath on a nearby grave with a ribbon attached, so she used the ribbon instead. They finished up and walked home. The next morning, one husband called the other, sounding worried. He said, "These girls' nights have got to stop. I think something's going on. My wife came home last night with no underwear." "That's nothing," the other husband said. "Mine came home with a ribbon stuck to her backside that said, 'With love from all of us at the fire station, we'll never forget you.'" A traveler became hopelessly lost in the middle of a vast desert. Realizing his only chance was to find civilization, he began walking. Hours passed. He grew thirsty, then weak, then dizzy. Eventually, he collapsed to his hands and knees, crawling across the hot sand. Just as he was about to pass out completely, he spotted a small shack far in the distance. Using every bit of strength he had left, he dragged himself to the door and gasped, "Water! Please, I need water." An old man stepped out and said kindly, "I'm very sorry, sir, I have no water. But would you like to buy a tie?" He held up a beautiful rack of silk ties. "You idiot! I'm dying. I need water." The old man nodded.
Well, if you really need water, there's another shack about 2 kilometers south of here. They'll have some. Somehow, nobody knows how, the traveler managed to crawl the full 2 kilometers. Moments from death, he pulled himself up to the second shack and knocked weakly before collapsing. A man who looked like the first one, only dressed in a fancy tuxedo, opened the door and said politely, "May I help you, sir?" "Water," the traveler whispered. The man shook his head and replied, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, sir, but you can't come in here without a tie." One night, my wife and I were laying in bed watching Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. The room was quiet except for the host's booming voice on the TV, and I figured it was the perfect time to test my luck. I turned to her underneath the sheets with a hopeful grin. "Hey," I said, "do you want to have sex?" Without even glancing my way, she shook her head. "No." I nodded thoughtfully and asked, "Is that your final answer?" Still staring at the screen, she sighed. "Yes." I leaned back, crossed my arms, and smirked. "All right then, I'd like to phone a friend."
A retired schoolteacher and an old farmer wander into a small-town bakery one morning. As they look over the pastries, the schoolteacher notices a tray of warm rolls on the counter. In a blink, he slips 3 rolls into his jacket pockets and calmly walks toward the door with a proud little smirk. Outside, he leans over and whispers, "Now that's talent. Did you see how I took those rolls without anyone noticing? That's real skill." The farmer chuckles and shakes his head. "Skill? That's just plain stealing. Let me show you how to get the same result using good old-fashioned charm." Curious, the schoolteacher follows him back inside the bakery. The farmer strolls up to the owner and says, "Good morning, sir. How would you like to see a simple magic trick?" The owner raises an eyebrow, intrigued. "A magic trick? Sure, let's see it." The farmer smiles and says, "For this trick, I'll need 3 of your best rolls." The owner hands him 1 roll, which the farmer promptly eats. He asks for a second roll and eats that one too. Then he asks for a third and eats it as well. When he's finished, he stands there smiling happily. The owner folds his arms and says, "All right, where was the magic? All I saw was you eating my rolls." The farmer points at the schoolteacher and says, "Check his pockets." I used to tend bar at a little place across the street from a hospital here in town. One afternoon, a guy walked in wearing a hospital gown, dragging an IV stand still hooked up to his arm. I figured it was unusual, but around here, you learn not to ask too many questions. I asked what he'd like, and without missing a beat, he said, "I'll take 2 beers, 2 stouts, 4 whiskey and cokes, 3 gin and tonics, and 6 shots of tequila." It sounded like he was stalking a party, but he was all alone. Still, a customer is a customer, so I got to work pouring everything he ordered. One by one, I lined the drinks up across the bar, and he started knocking them back like there was no tomorrow. Beer, then cocktails, then straight to the tequila, shot after shot, quick as you like. Didn't even pause for breath, just kept going till every last drop was gone. He let out a sigh, looked at me real serious, and said, "I really shouldn't have done that with what I've got." I said, "Oh yeah? What have you got?" He said, "About $4." 4 brothers left home for college. One became a lawyer, one a doctor, one a scientist, and one an entertainer. They all went on to be very successful. When their elderly mother was living alone, each son decided to give her a special gift. Years later, the brothers were talking about what they had done for her. The first said, "I had a beautiful, large house built for Mama." The second said, "I installed a state-of-the-art home theater. It cost a small fortune." The third said, "I bought her a brand new luxury car with a full-time chauffeur." The fourth smiled and said, "You know how Mama loves reading the Bible, and you know her eyesight isn't what it used to be. I sent her a parrot that can recite the entire Bible from memory. It took 12 scholars and 20 years to teach him. I had to pledge $100,000 a year for 20 years, but it was worth it. All Mama has to do is name the book, chapter, and verse." A few weeks later, Mom sent out her thank you notes. To the first son, she wrote,
"The house you built is enormous. I live in one room, but I have to clean the whole thing. Thank you, dear." To the second son, she wrote, "The theater is lovely, but I don't hear well anymore and I can barely see. Thank you anyway." To the third son, she wrote, "The car is beautiful, but I rarely go anywhere. I mostly stay home. Thank you all the same." And to the fourth son, she wrote, "You were the only one who truly put thought into your gift. The chicken was delicious."
A young doctor moved to a small Midwestern town to take over for a family doctor who was retiring. Before leaving, the older doctor suggested the young one join him on his rounds so everyone could meet the new face. At the first house, an elderly woman complained of stomach trouble. The older doctor said, "You're eating too much fruit. 1 or 2 servings a day is plenty." After they left, the young doctor asked, "You didn't even examine her. How did you know?" The older doctor smiled and said, "I dropped my stethoscope on purpose. When I bent down to pick it up, I saw a pile of banana peels in the trash. That told me everything I needed to know." The young doctor nodded and said, "Pretty smart. I'll try that on the next patient." They soon arrived at another home and spoke with a tired-looking woman. She said she felt exhausted and a bit down all the time. The young doctor said, "You're probably overdoing it with church activities. Try slowing down." As they walked out, the older doctor said, "I know her well, and that's likely right. But how did you figure it out so fast?" The young doctor grinned and said, "Same way you did. I dropped my stethoscope, and when I bent down, I noticed the preacher under the bed." The IRS decided to audit an old fella named Earl and summoned him down to the local IRS office. The auditor wasn't surprised when Earl arrived with his attorney right beside him. The auditor said, "Sir, you live very comfortably, yet you report no steady income. You claim you make your money through gambling, and frankly, we find that hard to believe." Earl smiled and said, "I'm an excellent gambler, and I can prove it. How about a little demonstration?" The auditor thought for a moment, then shrugged. "All right," he said, "go ahead." Earl said, "I'll bet you $1,000 that I can bite my own eye." The auditor paused, puzzled, but finally agreed. Earl reached up, popped out his glass eye, and gently bit it. The auditor nearly fell out of his chair. Earl chuckled and said, "Now I'll bet you $2,000 that I can bite my other eye." The auditor could clearly see Earl wasn't blind, so he accepted the bet. Earl removed his dentures and carefully bit his good eye. The auditor realized he'd just lost $3,000. Earl then asked, "Care to go double or nothing? I'll bet you $6,000 that I can stand on one side of your desk and pee into that wastebasket on the other without spilling a single drop in between." The auditor examined the distance and thought, "No way this old guy can pull that off." So he agreed to the bet. Earl unzipped, tried his best, and completely soaked the desk. Papers, folders, and the desktop were drenched. The auditor jumped up cheering, thrilled he'd finally won. But Earl's attorney buried his face in his hands and groaned. The auditor asked, "What's wrong with you?" The attorney replied, "Earl bet me $25,000 that he'd come in here, pee all over your desk, and you'd be happy about it." The pastor asked if anyone would like to share a testimony about an answered prayer. Martha stood up and slowly walked to the pulpit. She said, "I have a praise report. 2 months ago, my husband Harold fell off a ladder in the garage and crushed his scrotum. The pain was unbearable, and the doctors weren't sure they could help him." A sympathetic murmur spread through the congregation as everyone imagined poor Harold's suffering. He couldn't hug me or the grandkids, and every movement caused him terrible pain. We prayed while the doctors performed a delicate surgery, and they were able to piece together the crushed remnants of Hill's scrotum and wrap wire around it to hold it in place. More winces rippled through the crowd at the thought of such an operation. "Now," she said, her voice trembling, "praise the Lord, Harold is home. The doctors say with time his scrotum should recover completely." A collective sigh of relief filled the sanctuary.
The pastor asked if anyone else would like to speak. An older gentleman stood up and walked to the front. He said, "I'm Harold." The room fell silent. He said, "I just wanted to tell my wife, the word is sternum." Someone opened a brand new husband superstore, and the rules alone are hilarious. A new store opened where women could go and choose a husband. At the entrance, there was a large sign explaining how the store worked. The store has 6 floors. The quality of the husbands improve as you go up. You can choose a husband from any floor, but once you go up a floor, you can't go back down, and you can only visit the store once. So, of course, a woman decided to go in and take a look. First floor sign, "These men have steady jobs." She thought, well, that's a good start, but decided to go up to the next floor. Second floor sign, "These men have steady jobs, love children, and are very good looking." She said, okay, that's better, and went up another floor. Third floor sign, "These men have steady jobs, love children, are very good looking, and help with housework." She stopped and said, wow, that's amazing. But her curiosity got the best of her, so she went up one more floor. Fourth floor sign, "These men have steady jobs, love children, are extremely handsome, help with housework, and are very romantic." She was very tempted to stay, but she just had to see what was on the last floor. So up she went. Sixth floor sign, "You are visitor number 31,456,012 to this floor. There are no men on this floor. This floor exists solely to prove that women are impossible to please. Thank you for shopping at the husband store." But wait, it gets better. Across the street, the same owner opened a wife store. First floor, "Wives who love romance." Second floor, "Wives who love romance enjoy a cold beer and bring money to the table." Floors 3 through 6 have never been visited.
It's a Friday night at a busy American bar, and everyone's relaxing, laughing, and enjoying themselves. Suddenly, the door bursts open and a huge, muscular man with a thick beard storms in, carrying a large sack over his shoulder. The whole place goes quiet as he marches to the center of the room without saying a word. He slams the sack on a table, pulls out a snapping alligator and a heavy hammer, and clears everything else off the table with one sweep. With incredible strength, he pries the alligator's jaws wide open and holds them there, showing off its rows of sharp teeth. The man then pulls his pants down to his knees, exposing his impressive genitalia. Then, in a shocking move, he leans forward and places his whole package right between the alligator's open jaws. The entire bar gasps as he grabs the hammer and brings it down hard on the alligator's head. Amazingly, the alligator doesn't bite down, and after a moment, the man steps back, straightens himself up, and looks around calmly. "For anyone brave enough to try that," he says, "I'll give you $1,000. There's a long, uncomfortable silence before a small, older gentleman at the back slowly raises his hand. The big man squints and says, You want to give it a shot?" The man nods and says, "Yes, sir. But only if you promise not to hit me quite so hard with that hammer." A retired fellow was cruising down a quiet country road when he spotted a little bunny hopping right into his lane. He swerved to miss it, but the poor thing darted the wrong way and got clipped by his car. Feeling awful, he pulled over and hurried back to check on it. To his dismay, the bunny wasn't moving. The man, soft-hearted and fond of animals, stood there shaking his head, then started to tear up. Just then, a lady driving by noticed him and pulled over to see if he was all right. "What's the matter?" she asked gently. "I feel terrible," he said. "I accidentally hit this little bunny, and I think I killed it." The woman nodded calmly and said, "Don't worry, I've got just the thing." She went to her trunk, grabbed a spray can, and walked over to the bunny. After giving it a good spray, something amazing happened. The bunny popped right up, gave them both a cheerful little wave, and hopped down the road. About 50 yards later, it stopped, turned, waved, then off it went again. The man couldn't believe his eyes. "What in the world did you spray on that bunny?" he asked. The woman smiled and handed him the can. The label read, "Hairspray." restores life to dead hair, and adds a permanent wave. The day finally came when Forrest Gump passed away and arrived at heaven's gates. Standing there was St. Peter, but the gates were closed. St. Peter smiled and said, "Well now, Forrest, we've heard plenty about you. Heaven's getting a bit crowded these days, so we've started giving a short entrance test." Forrest scratched his head and said, "Aw, shucks, nobody told me about a test. Life was hard enough already. Hope this isn't too tricky." St. Peter replied, "Don't worry, it's just 3 questions. First, which days of the week start with the letter T? Second, how many seconds are in a year? Third, what is God's first name?" Forrest nodded slowly and said he'd have a think about it. The next day, he came back looking confident. St. Peter said, "All right, Forrest, let's hear your answers. Which days of the week start with the letter T?" Forrest grinned and said, "Well, the first one's easy, today and tomorrow." St. Peter blinked and said, "Well, that's not exactly what I meant, but I suppose you've got a point. I'll give you that one." He continued, "Now, how many seconds are in a year?" Forrest said, "That one took some thinking, but I figured it out. There are 12. St. Peter looked stunned and said, "12? How on earth did you get 12? Forrest replied, "Well, there's January 2nd, February 2nd, March 2nd. St. Peter raised his hand and said, all right, I see what you did there. Not what I had in mind, but fair enough." He smiled and said, "Last question, what is God's first name?" Forrest answered proudly, "That one's easy. It's Harold." St. Peter frowned and said, "Harold? Where did you get that from?" Forrest said, "From the prayer everybody knows." St. Peter asked, "Which prayer?" Forrest said, "You know, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name."